Today I'm going to talk to you about sourdough baking schedules, how to fit sourdough baking into your busy life. I'm not going to give you finished schedules, but I will teach you how to make your own. Hi, I'm Sune and I'm a food geek. Today I'm going to talk about how to make your own baking schedules. My goal is to give you the tools so that you can fit baking delicious and awesome sourdough bread into your busy life. This is going to be a pretty long video because there's a lot to cover. I hope you'll stick around to the end because I think you'll be a better baker for it. I will be referring to two of my recipes, but they're really just two different paradigms in sourdough baking. The first one is a regular sourdough bread, which you can find the complete description and method in my video, Sourdough Bread for Beginners, linked in the card above. The second one is a no-knead sourdough bread, which you can find the complete description and method in my video, The World's Easiest Sourdough Bread, linked in this card above. If you're new to this channel, I bake a lot of sourdough bread and I make delicious food from all over the world. I'm on a quest to get the most out of every ingredient, and my goal is to teach you how to do that in simple and understandable steps. So join me by subscribing and ringing the bell so you won't miss any future videos. In the regular sourdough bread recipe, we have the following steps. 1. Make a Levain and autolyse. This step is optional. 2. Mixing the dough. 3. Bulk fermentation, including agitation of the dough, stretch and fold, or some other method. 4. Shaping. 5. Final proof. And 6. Baking. A no-knead recipe will have the following steps. 1. Mixing the dough. 2. Bulk fermentation. 3. Optionally shaping the dough. 4. Optionally retarding. And 5. Baking. The thing that we can change the timings of are the fermentation and proofing steps. By utilizing a refrigerator, we can expand these steps so that they fit our schedule. Everything and all the timings I say here are based off a room temperature of 21 degrees Celsius, about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. If your kitchen is vastly colder or warmer, your timings will be different, but the principles are the same. All right, let's put some numbers on that. If you use a Levain and autolyse, you'll need somewhere around 4 hours after mixing the Levain until it's ready for use. Then you mix the dough. Some people mix in the Levain or sourdough starter first and then let the gluten rest for about 30 minutes before they mix the salt in. I've started mixing in the salt at the same time as the starter. That makes things a lot less complicated. Salt does retard the dough slightly and also firms up the dough. You can see how salt affects fermentation in my salt and sourdough starter time-lapse experiment that I'm linking in this card above. After the dough is mixed, the gluten needs to relax for about half an hour. Then the dough goes into bulk fermentation. Bulk fermentation meaning where most of the fermentation is done in the recipe. The bulk usually starts with agitation, which can be done in several ways. The most common being stretch and fold, but there's also coil fold and slap and fold. The purpose of stretch and folds are to work the gluten in the dough, but also to provide structure in the crumb. The more stretch and folds that you do, the more uniform your crumb will become. How long your fermentation will take is hard to put a number on, but at room temperature it can be 4 to 6 hours. The shorter the rise, the more rising power is left in the dough, but at some point it just becomes too much. A common problem that I see all the time is that people have a pretty dense lower half of the bread, and then the crust on the top has been lifted off, a so-called flying crust. This is a telltale sign of under-fermentation, which means the bulk should have been longer. Then there's the other extreme, if you run your bulk too long. Then the dough will be overly sticky, hard to shape, and when you go to bake, it turns into a frisbee. That's over-fermentation. Depending on how much power your starter has, the length and the maximum rise of your dough can differ. I usually go for a dough rising about 50% during bulk. Then there's the shaping and the final proof. The shaping takes about half an hour, and the final proof usually takes a couple of hours. That's around 15 hours in all. In this type of recipe, there are 3 places where we can split up the work. The first is after building the levain. You can make it the night before and then use it for mixing in the morning, or you can mix it in the morning and then mix the dough around noon. The second place we can split is the bulk fermentation. You can extend the bulk fermentation by doing it cold. When you do a cold bulk, your fridge shouldn't be too cold. I'd say a minimum of 5 degrees Celsius, about 41 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you have a wine fridge, you can easily cold bulk at 12°C, about 54 F. The dough will ferment faster, but much slower than at room temperature. The last parameter that we can tweak is the final proof. Once you've shaped your dough, you can put it directly into the fridge. You should at least do a final proof of about 8 hours, but you can also extend it to 24, 48, or even 36 hours. A final proof in the fridge is called a retard. When you do a retard, you should have your fridge set as cold as possible. I have mine set to 2 degrees Celsius, about 35.5 degrees Fahrenheit at all times. It also vastly improves the shelf life of other things stored in the fridge. There's really no downside, except the electric bill maybe. So here's a couple ideas for schedules. Feed your starter in the morning. In the evening, mix the levain. The next morning, mix the dough and perform the stretch and folds. Let your dough bulk, shape it, and put it in the fridge until you have time. Maybe the same evening, the next morning, or even the next evening. Or feed your starter in the morning. In the afternoon, mix the levain. In the evening, mix the dough and perform the stretch and folds. Then put the dough in the fridge and do a cold bulk. This probably takes 18 to 24 hours, so you're ready to shape the next evening. Before shaping, you should probably let the dough come up to room temperature, unless of course you have super high hydration. Then the cold dough may work in your favor. After shaping, let the dough retard in the fridge for at least 8 hours. Then bake at your convenience. Alright, let's have a look at the timings of the no-knead method. There's no levain in this method, so you'll need to make sure that your starter has been fed at least 12 hours before you start mixing. In the evening, mix everything for the dough about 15 minutes. If you want to be certain about the gluten development, you can add a few stretches and folds in the beginning, but it's not needed in my experience. Let the dough ferment for about 10 hours. Shape the dough and put it in the fridge while the oven is heating, about 30 minutes. Bake it about 2 hours. That's around 13¼ hours, all in all. Here you can vary the retard at the end. After shaping, you can throw it in the fridge and bake it at your convenience. I will often mix the dough in the evening, shape it before work, and then let it retard until I get home from work. But nobody's saying it has to be an overnight fermentation. You can mix the dough in the morning, let it bulk during the day, shape it in the early evening, and then bake. That's a one-day bread. With all this being said, you may live in a warm or humid place where dough ferments much quicker, or you might live in a place where the kitchen is pretty cold in the winter and fermentation is already somewhat retarded. Another thing that you can use to help things along is a proofer. I own a Broad & Taylor proofer that I sometimes use to speed up the levain and the bulk so that I get things done if I have something I need to do at night. I've linked the proofer in the description. It's not cheap, but it's a great tool if you love to bake. I hope you learned something today. See you next time.